The sun at noon over Dry Creek was a hammer. It struck the alkali dust of the main street and sent a white glare up into Clara Belle's eyes. She kept her head down, not because of shame, but to shield her vision. The whispers, however, found her anyway. She was 25 years old, and she carried a freshly sewn shirt folded over her arm. The blue calico was sharp against the sea of brown dust. The dust was the color of old blood, the color of memory. It settled on everything. It coated the long porch of the mercantile, the sweaty flanks of the horses tied to the rail, and the brim of her own worn bonnet. Clara walked with a straight spine. Her mother had taught her that. Your spine is good steel. Her mother had said, do not let them bend it. But the whispers felt like tiny, hot needles against her skin. There she goes. A woman's voice, sharp and dry as a locust's wing. Brazen, walking right through the market. Jedediah Purcell surely dodged that bullet. The deacon was right about her. Clara did not look. She pushed open the door to Henderson's mercantile. The air inside was cooler, thick with the smell of coffee beans, cured tobacco, and new rope. Mr. Henderson stood behind the counter, polishing a pair of spectacles. He was a small man, and he looked at her with an expression she hated more than the whispers, pity. Miss Belle, he said, his voice quiet. The shirt for you, Mr. Henderson. She laid it on the counter. The stitching was fine, tiny and even. She was the best seamstress in Dry Creek, maybe in the whole territory. It was the one thing they could not take from her. He inspected the seams, his fingers tracing the collar. Good work, as always. He reached into the wooden till and counted out the coins. He pushed them toward her. Clara immediately pushed a few back. For the flour and salt. He nodded, bagging the items. He did not meet her eyes again. She took the flour sack, the weight familiar and comforting, and turned to leave. She stepped back out into the hammer blow of the sun. Further down the street, a wagon was parked by the town well. A large wooden cask rested on the flatbed, and a tin dipper hung from a hook. A roughly painted sign read, "Water Free." Elias Ward stood by the cask. He was the owner of the Warm Spring Ranch, a man whose face was a map of dry seasons and quiet kindness. His beard was more gray than brown. He was filling a jar for a small child, whose mother watched with a tired gratitude. Two men leaned against the wall of the blacksmith shop nearby. They were rough men, with the lazy arrogance of those who work for a powerful boss. Their boots were scuffed, and their gun belts heavy. They watched Elias. "Giving it away, old man," one of them called out. His voice was lazy, full of gravel. "A fool and his water are soon parted." Elias Ward did not look at them. He handed the jar back to the woman and tipped his hat. "God bless, ma'am." The second man spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Bet you charge the pretty ones a different price, Ward, or maybe you just like them ruined." Clara flinched. The jibe was for her, though aimed at him. Elias's head turned slowly. His eyes, the color of washed-out denim, found the men. He said nothing. His silence had a weight the men's voices lacked. They looked away first, muttering. Clara had to approach. She carried a piece of repaired leather for him. It was a heavy strap from an old saddle, one she knew he kept in memory of his late wife. The stitching had rotted near the buckle. "Mr. Ward," she said, her voice low. His face softened instantly when he saw her. The hardness left his eyes. "Miss Belle, that was quick work. You have magic in your fingers." "It was just strong thread, sir." She handed him the mended strap. He examined her work, pulling at the new stitches. They held firm. "This is more than strong thread. This is care." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin, pressing it into her hand. It was more than they had agreed upon. Mr. Ward, I cannot. The price was—" "The work is worth more," he said, his voice firm but low, meant only for her. He closed her fingers over the coin. Good work should be honored, Miss Bell, especially when the world is busy trying to dishonor. He paused, his gaze lifting to the red bluffs beyond the town. Home is where you are seen, Clara, and where you are chosen. You'll remember that. She nodded, clutching the coin and the flour sack. She could feel the eyes of Hale's men on her back. She turned to go. A new sound cut through the market's afternoon stupor. It was not the heavy plod of cow ponies or the rattle of freight wagons. It was the light, quick strike of many hooves, a sound like rhythmic tapping on hard earth. A line of horses, maybe a dozen, came down the street. They were colts, black as obsidian, their coats shining with health. They moved like water flowing over dark rock. Leading them was a man who sat his horse as if he were part of it. He was Dine, the people the white folk called Navajo. His hair was tied back with a simple leather thong. He wore a plain cotton shirt and buckskin trousers. His face was calm, his eyes scanning the town, reading it like a trail. He saw the men by the blacksmith. He saw the old rancher by the water wagon. He saw the woman in the faded bonnet, holding the flour. His gaze did not linger. It was not his way to stare. Propriety. He stopped his horse near the mercantile and dismounted in one fluid motion. He carried a tightly woven roll. The wool dyed in rich colors of the earth. Clara watched, waiting for him to pass. He entered the store. She began her walk toward the edge of town, toward the small cabin she rented. The Dine man emerged a moment later. Tlogiashki, that was his name, though no one in Dry Creek knew it. It meant weaving boy, or textile youth, a name given by his grandmother. He was a carrier of messages, a scout who had known the white soldiers both as enemies and as allies under the Treaty of 1868. He held a small packet from Henderson, needles, strong steel needles, and thread. He had traded a small, beautiful weaving for them. He spoke to Henderson in broken English. Needles, good. Thread, strong. He used his hands, showing the strength he needed. Henderson, who valued trade above prejudice, had nodded. Ashki tucked the packet away. His eyes, dark and sharp, took in the town again. He understood these places. He saw the man with the badge, Sheriff Pike, standing outside his office, his thumb hooked in his belt, watching everything. He saw the tall, white steeple of the church. He knew these symbols, the white man's law, the white man's God. They meant fences and paper and rules that changed like the wind. He had seen what those rules did to his people 8 years ago. During the long walk, he gathered the lead ropes of his colts. This was a brittle place. He would be gone by dusk. Clara continued her walk. It was a gauntlet. She had to pass the saloon where more men lounged, their talk stopping as she passed. Then she had to pass the church. Deacon Purcell was standing on the steps, his black coat making him look like a pious crow. He was speaking to 2 women from the town council. He saw Clara approaching, deliberately. He turned his back on her. He made a show of it. The 2 women saw his gesture. They saw Clara. They huddled together and pulled their skirts aside, as if Clara were dragging the red dust, and the plague, with her. Clara's jaw tightened. That was the deacon's law, the law of shame. Sheriff Pike's law was the gun and the unfair trail tax he charged every wagon. Mason Hale's law. The man those roughs worked for was money. Clara was trapped between them all. The deacon's son, Jedediah. The memory rose up, tasting like bile. His hot, whiskey breath on her face, his hands, heavy and bruising, grabbing her arm in the livery stable. He had believed, with the arrogance of a rich man's son, that their engagement meant he owned her. She had said no. She had shoved him away, and he had stumbled back into a trough. The next day, she had returned the ring. Jedediah, humiliated, had lied. He told his father she had been impure with a drifter. The deacon, horrified at the slight to his family's name, had believed his son. Or perhaps he had not. But it did not matter. He had pronounced her ruined, damaged goods, a harlot. And the town, hungry for righteousness, had followed his lead. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Be careful, Clara. This world is not kind to a woman alone." Her mother had coughed her lungs out 2 winters ago. The cold had taken her. Her father. He had left on a cattle drive 6 months before that, chasing a promise of high pay. He had kissed her forehead and promised to send money. He never returned. The trail had swallowed him. Clara was alone, 25 years old, marked, but she was not broken. She reached the edge of town. Her cabin was a small, 1-room building near the creek bed. The creek itself was just a scar of dry stones, the town's namesake, a wooden bridge, its timbers gray and splintered, crossed the arroyo. Clara stopped in the middle of the bridge. She looked back at Dry Creek. It was an ugly town, a raw settlement clawed from the red earth, but it was all she had. The wind picked up, a steady, sighing sound. It brought the smell of sagebrush, and it brought the dust, always the dust. It felt like the ash of old memories, settling on her shoulders, waiting for a stronger gust to blow it all away and show what lay underneath. There was another rumor on that wind. Besides the whispers about her, it was the talk of the railroad. Mason Hale, the man who owned the saloon and half the land claims, was pushing for it. He said the railroad would bring prosperity, link them to the east. Elias Ward had said otherwise. He had told her, "Prosperity for who? Clara, the tracks need land. They need water, and Hale does not care who he takes from." The ground under Dry Creek was shifting. The tension was not just the stares that followed her. It was the low, hungry hum of greed. Someone was going to fall. Clara held her flour sack tighter and walked on, toward the fragile safety of her own door. The silence of the main street was a held breath. Clara Bell stood frozen, the whispers of the townspeople suddenly ceasing. She had just passed the church steps. "Miss Bell." Deacon Purcell's voice was not a whisper. It was a proclamation, high and sharp, intended to carry. The sound of the blacksmith's hammer stopped. The chatter from the saloon porch died. Every eye in the market square turned. Clara turned slowly. Her heart began a low, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. Deacon Purcell stood on the top step of his church, as if it were a stage. He was a tall, thin man, his black suit immaculate against the red dust. He held a single sheet of paper in his hand. "We have a sickness in our midst," he called out, his voice ringing with practiced fervor. "A rot that threatens the moral fiber of Dry Creek. And today, God has delivered us a confession." He held the paper high. The sun caught it, making it stark white. Clara knew. She knew as surely as she knew her own name. This was his doing. "I hold in my hand," the deacon boomed, "the words of a lost soul, a confession found, a plea from one caught in the snares of Satan." A murmur went through the crowd. They edged closer. This was better than a dogfight. Clara's flour sack suddenly felt like it was filled with stones. "Deacon Purcell," she said. Her voice was too quiet. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Deacon, what are you doing?" "I am saving a soul, Miss Bell, or at least I am cleansing the flock." He began to read. His voice dripped with false piety, rolling over the words with relish. "I cannot sleep at night, for the urges the devil puts inside me. I walk the street hoping to catch the eye of righteous men, to pull them from their path. I paint my face. I lured young Jedediah Purcell with false promises, tempting him, hoping to trap him in sin. I am a vessel of filth. I am. "That is a lie," Clara's voice cracked, but it was loud. "I wrote no such letter. That is not my hand." "The letter was found, child," Purcell shouted, pointing a long, pale finger at her. "Left for any to see. A confession of your true nature. You stand here, unchaperoned, day after day, a blight on decent folk, a temptation." Someone laughed. It was a high, cruel titter from one of the women who had turned her back on Clara earlier. The sound broke the dam. A man on the saloon porch, already deep in his cups, bellowed. "A vessel of filth," she says, "seems honest enough to me." More laughter followed. It was ugly, a starved sound. The townspeople, bored and brittle from the heat and the dust, had found a target. "Shame!" yelled another woman. "Shaming the deacon's good family." Clara took an involuntary step back. Her eyes darted, looking for an escape, but she was surrounded. They were all looking at her, not as Clara, the seamstress, but as this thing, this harlot from a letter. A boy, no older than 10, emboldened by the adults, bent down. He scooped up a rotten peach core from the trough. He wound up and threw it. It splattered in the dust just at the hem of her skirt. Clara flinched, a small, sharp gasp. The throw broke the last thread of civility. Another man, one of Hale's hands, tossed a clod of dried mud. It struck her skirt, leaving a dark, wet stain. "Harlot." "Get out!" Clara stood, rooted. She would not run. She would not give them the satisfaction. She lifted her chin, her eyes burning, her face pale. She would stand there and take it, because that was all she had left. A movement cut through the crowd. Elias Ward. He had left his water wagon and was walking. He did not shove. He did not run. He just walked with a heavy, deliberate tread. And the crowd parted for him. They muttered, but they moved. He walked straight to Clara and stopped, placing himself between her and the crowd. His back, broad and solid, was a shield. He said nothing to her. He simply shrugged out of his old canvas ranch coat. It was dusty and smelled faintly of horses and lye soap. He draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it was startling, a sudden, firm comfort. It covered her blue shirt. It covered the mud stain. Then Elias Ward turned to face the town. His voice was not loud like the deacon's. It was low, and it shook with a cold anger. "Shame on you," he said. The laughter died. The catcalls stopped. "Shame," he said again, his eyes moving from face to face. "On every last one of you. You call this God's work, deacon." He stared up at Purcell, who looked startled. Hiding behind a piece of paper to stone a woman who has done nothing but work hard and bury her own dead. You think God is smiling on this? He looked at the men by the saloon. "Cowards, the lot of you, throwing filth at a lone woman. Is this the measure of Dry Creek? Are you men, or are you just a pack of dogs?" The crowd shifted. Men looked at their boots. The women looked away. The shame had been turned back on them, and it stung. From the edge of the street, by his string of black colts, Tlogiashki watched. His face was impassive. He had not moved to leave. He saw the old rancher. He saw the man with the black coat and the paper. He saw the men with guns who were enjoying the sport. And he saw the woman. He had seen this play before, in different languages, on different ground. The Bilagana used paper and shame as weapons, to drive people from their land. He looked past Clara, past the crowd, toward the red cliffs to the north, where the Dry Creek cut a canyon. He knew that land. There were springs there, hidden by the cottonwoods. Water. He understood. This was not about sin. This was about the earth. They were shaming the woman because she was alone. A shamed woman could not get credit at the mercantile. A shamed woman could not hold a lease. They were trying to make her run. This was a hunt. And the man in the black coat was just one of the dogs they had turned loose. The jingle of spurs broke the heavy silence. Sheriff Pike strolled forward. He had been watching from his office, and now he decided it was time. He moved with a lazy roll of his shoulders, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. Mason Hale was a step behind him, a quiet shadow in a clean, dark suit, his eyes missing nothing. Now, Elias," Pike said, his voice flat and bored. "That is enough. You are making a scene. stirring up the rabble. She is the one being assaulted. Sheriff, Elias said, his voice tight. Are you blind, or just complicit? Pike stopped a few feet away. He looked at Clara, his eyes cold and empty as a snake's. She is the one causing the disturbance. Look at this. The whole market has stopped. Decent folk are upset. He gestured to Purcell. The deacon is just tending to his flock. This is madness, Clara whispered. The words were choked. Pike's gaze snapped to her. Miss Bell, I am fining you $2 for disturbing the peace and for inciting this unrest. $2. Clara's blood ran cold. $2 was the price of a winter's worth of thread. It was food for a week. It was everything she did not have. You will not, Elias said, stepping forward. I will, Pike said. His hand dropped, not to his gun, but to rest on the butt of it. A casual threat. Or she can spend the night in my cell, maybe a few nights. To think on her behavior, you want that. Elias her in there, with the drunks. The air was sharp with menace. Elias understood. Clara understood. A night in that cell and the deacon's lies would become truth. Elias stared at the sheriff for a long, hard second. Slowly, his hand went to his pocket. He pulled out 2 heavy silver dollars. He looked at Pike, then at the ground. He threw the coins into the red dust at the sheriff's feet. You will pick that up, Pike said, his face darkening. It is payment, Elias said. You retrieve it. For a moment, nothing moved. Pike's jaw muscle twitched. Then he gave a short, sharp nod to one of Hale's men, the one who had thrown the mud. The man grinned, stooped, scooped up the coins, and slapped them into Pike's hand. Get her out of here, Elias, Pike said, pocketing the silver. And you, Miss Bell, you cause one more whisper of trouble in this town. I will rule you a vagrant, and I will jail you for it. Do you understand me? Clara was shaking. It was not from fear. It was from a rage so cold it felt like ice in her veins. She felt the eyes of the town on her, the weight of Elias's coat. She was shattered. The small, fragile life she had been holding together with stitches and pride had just been torn apart. But her spine was still steel. She looked directly at Sheriff Pike. She did not speak. She just looked at him. Elias put a gentle, firm hand on her elbow. Come, Clara, let's go. He guided her away from the crowd, away from the church steps, back toward his water wagon. The crowd parted for them. Silent now, avoiding their eyes. When they reached the wagon, Elias let out a long breath. He looked at her, his face etched with anger. They are animals, Clara, vultures. I cannot pay you back for the fine, Mr. Ward, she said. Her voice was a rasp. She hated the weakness in it. You will not, he said gruffly. That was not a fine. It was theft, and this is not a debt. I cannot stay here, she whispered, looking back at her small cabin across the dry creek. They will not let me live. No, he agreed, his voice low. You cannot, not in that cabin. It is too exposed. They will be back. Pike's men, Hale's men. I have nowhere else. The words were the starkest truth. Yes, you do, Elias said. I have a room for you at the ranch. My housekeeper, Maria, is there. You will be safe. You can work for me. You can mend the saddles. You can sew for the hands. You can help Maria. Anything. I will pay you a fair wage. Just be safe. She looked at him. An old man, a widower. The town already whispered about him giving water for free. What would they say now? They will talk, Mr. Ward, she said. They will say, about you and me. Elias Ward looked at the town, his gaze full of a weary contempt. Let them, he said. I am 71 years old. I am too old to care for the words of fools and cowards. My conscience is clean. Is yours? Yes, she said, the word small but firm. Then it is settled. Go to your cabin. Get what you need. What you can carry. I will wait here with the wagon. Clara nodded, clutching the heavy coat around her. She turned to walk toward the bridge. She saw something in the dust near where she had stood. A small paper packet. Her needles. They must have fallen from her pocket when she flinched. Before she could bend to get them, a shadow fell over her. The Dine Man, Tlogiashki. He had walked his horses closer. He stooped, one fluid motion, and picked up the packet. He straightened. His face was impossible to read. It was carved from the same red rock as the canyons. He did not smile. He did not pity her. He just saw her. He held out the packet of needles. "You dropped this." His English was slow, measured, each word chosen. She reached out, her hand trembling. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was warm. He did not let go immediately. His dark eyes held hers. He saw the shame, but he saw the steel underneath it. "Keep," he said. His voice was very low, meant only for her. Long road. He released the packet. He turned, gathered the leads of his black colts, and without looking at Pike, or Hale, or Elias, he began to walk his horses out of town, heading north toward the Red Canyon. Clara watched him go. A long road. He had no idea. She turned and hurried to her cabin. Elias watched her go, then began to unhitch the empty water cask. "You are a fool, Elias." Mason Hale had approached, Sheriff Pike at his side. They stood like predators, relaxed and confident. "Taking in damaged goods. It is bad for business, old man." Hale said. He was smiling, a thin, dry smile. "My business is my own, Mason," Elias said, not looking at him, his hands busy with the harness. "This whole town is my business," Hale replied softly. "The railroad is coming. We need tidiness. We need order. That girl, she is chaos." "That girl is a human being," Elias said, his voice flat. "That girl is a squatter." Pike cut in. "Her lease on that cabin land is flimsy as tissue paper." Elias stopped his work and turned. "You want her gone because you want her land. That lease, the water in that canyon." Hale's smile tightened. "I want what is best for progress, for the good of this territory." "I could sue the deacon," Elias said, though he knew the words were hollow. "For slander. For this theater." Pike laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Sue him in what court, Elias? With what judge? I am the law here, and I say the peace was disturbed. Case closed." Hale put a calming hand on Pike's shoulder. "That is enough. Sheriff, we have made our point." He looked at Elias, his eyes friendly, which was worse than his anger. "Just be careful, Elias, that coat you gave her. It might not be enough to keep her warm." Hale and Pike turned and walked back toward the saloon, their boots scraping the dusty boardwalk. As they stepped into the shade of the porch, Hale leaned in close to Pike. "See that the boys ride out tonight?" he murmured. Pike nodded, his gaze on the distant bridge. "Which marker?" "The one at the Red Canyon. The one on her lease. I want it moved. By morning." The guest room at Warm Spring Ranch was clean. The bed had a quilt sewn by Elias Ward's late wife. Its colors faded to soft blues and creams. Maria, his housekeeper, a quiet woman with sad eyes, had brought Clara a bowl of hot water and a clean towel. "You are safe here, señorita," Maria had said, her voice a low murmur. "El patron, he is a good man. He does not fear the jackals." But Clara did. She sat on the edge of the bed, Elias's heavy coat still around her shoulders. She was safe. Yes, but she felt caged. The events of the market had played over in her mind. A repeating loop of faces twisted in laughter, the thud of mud on her skirt, the deacon's voice branding her. She had her small bundle of clothes, her sewing kit, She began to unpack. The simple movements a small comfort. She laid her spare dress in the bottom drawer of the pine dresser. She set her needles and thread on top. Then she froze. The papers, the lease papers for her cabin, and the small plot of land that included the path to the canyon spring. It was not much, but it was the only thing her father had left her. The lease paid in full for 5 years with his last cattle drive money. She had tucked the papers inside the heavy family Bible for safekeeping. In her haste, in her shame, she had left the Bible on the small table by her cold hearth. She stood bolt upright. Hale, Pike, they wanted her gone. They wanted that land. That paper was her only proof. She looked at the door. Elias had gone to the barn, his face a mask of weary anger. Maria was in the kitchen. Clara knew she had to go back. She waited. She waited for what felt like hours, though the clock on the mantel only ticked twice around. The ranch house settled into sleep. The moon was high, a cold silver disk. It must have been near midnight. She slipped out of the room. She did not take a horse. She did not know how to saddle one without waking the hands in the bunkhouse. She walked. The walk back to Dry Creek was long, almost 2 miles. The night air was cool, smelling of dust and pine. Her feet made almost no sound on the trail. The town was a dark shape, a few yellow lights still burning in the saloon. She avoided the main street, cutting behind the livery, her heart pounding. She crossed the dry wooden bridge. The creek bed below was a river of shadows. As she neared her cabin, she smelled it, wood smoke, and not the faint, sweet smell of her own banked embers. This was the sharp, oily scent of a pine knot torch. She heard a low voice, a muffled curse, the sound of a heavy tool striking hard earth. They were not in her cabin. They were past it, up on the small rise where her property line met the canyon path. She stopped, her blood running cold. She looked around. A long, dry piece of timber, part of an old fence, lay near her woodpile. She crept to her hearth, fished out a still glowing coal, and blew it to life against the wood. It caught, sputtering. She held the branch high, a makeshift torch. She moved toward the sounds, her fear eclipsed by a sudden, hot rage. She saw them, 3 men. She recognized them from the market. Hale's men. They had pulled the heavy wooden survey marker from the ground, the marker that had stood there for 10 years, the one with the government stamp. It lay on its side, like a dead soldier. In its place, they were hammering a new, raw pine stake. They were moving her line, moving it 50 yards east, cutting off her claim to the spring. "What are you doing?" Clara shouted. Her voice tore the silence. The men spun around, startled. Their faces were demonic in the flickering light of their own torch. "Well, looky here," one of them growled. He was the man who had spat at Elias. "The little church mouse." "You get off my land," Clara said, running at them. She held her torch like a weapon. "That is my marker." "This is Hale's land now, sweetheart," the man said. He laughed. "Pike said you was safe at the old man's ranch." "Maybe she missed us." Another one sneered. He had a heavy hammer in his hand. Clara did not stop. She swung her torch at the man nearest her. He recoiled, cursing, but another man grabbed her from behind. He seized her arm, twisting it. Clara screamed. The torch flew from her hand, landing in the dust where it smoked and dimmed. "Got her!" the man yelled. He threw her to the ground. She landed hard on her shoulder. The breath knocked from her. "Hold her down," the first man said, his voice changing. It was ugly now, full of a thick new intention. She needs to be taught a lesson, taught what happens to girls who make trouble. He knelt beside her. His hand reached out and grabbed the front of her dress. "No!" she shrieked, kicking, scratching at his face. "Get off me!" He laughed and ripped the fabric. The sound of tearing cotton was louder than her scream. A whistle. It was not a bird. It was high, thin, and sharp as a needle. It seemed to come from the rocks, from the air itself. The man on top of Clara froze. What in the hell was that? Get this done, the man with the hammer said, his voice suddenly nervous. Get off her. The new voice was quiet, calm. It came from the darkness just beyond the torchlight. The men scrambled to their feet. A figure stepped into the weak circle of light. It was Tul-Ogi Ashki. He had not gone north. He was camped in the canyon, on the high rocks, watching the town. He must have seen her leave the ranch, or seen the lights on her land. He held no rifle. His hands were empty. It is just the Indian, the first man said, his bravado returning. He reached for the pistol at his belt. Ashki moved. He was not a brawler. He did not waste motion. He crossed the space in 2 quick steps. Before the man's gun could clear the holster, Ashki struck him. It was a hard, open palm blow to the side of the man's head. The man dropped as if his strings had been cut. The second man, the one with the hammer, swung it in a wide, desperate arc. Ashki ducked under the blow. He stepped inside the man's reach and drove his fist, hard, into the man's stomach. The man folded, gasping. Ashki did not hit him again. He just pushed him, and the man collapsed. The third man, the one who had grabbed her arm, was running. He was scrambling back toward the town. Ashki let him go. Silence. There was only the sound of 2 men groaning on the ground, and Clara's ragged breathing. Ashki turned to her. He did not offer a hand. He just waited. Clara pushed herself up. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. She pulled the torn pieces of her dress together, her face burning with humiliation and fury. Ashki looked at the men on the ground, his face impassive. Then he walked to the displaced marker. He studied it. He crouched, looking at the earth. Come, he said. Clara retrieved her torch, blowing the embers back to a low flame. She brought it closer. He pointed to the ground, near where the men had tied their horses. The moonlight was bright, and the torch cast a clear shadow. He pointed to a horseshoe print in the dust. What is it? She whispered. Hale's horses, Ashki said. His English was precise. Look here. He traced the print with his finger. All nails are round. This one, he tapped a single mark, is square. A different nail. From his forge. I saw it this afternoon. This horse belongs to him. The sound of wagon wheels. Coming fast. Clara jumped, terror rising again. It is Elias, she said, recognizing the rattle of the old wagon. Elias Ward pulled the team to a halt, jumping down before the wagon stopped. He held a large repeating rifle in his hands. He must have woken, found her gone, and come immediately. Clara, he yelled. He saw the men on the ground. He saw Ashki, standing near her. He raised the rifle, his hands shaking. Get away from her! No, Clara ran to him, stumbling. Mr. Ward, no, he saved me. It was Hale's men. They were moving my marker. They attacked me. Elias lowered the rifle, his gaze sweeping the scene. He saw the torn dress, the men on the ground, the new stake. His face, old and kind, turned to granite. Get in the wagon, Clara, he said. He looked at Ashki. Son, you too. Pike will be here soon. That running man will fetch him. I cannot, Ashki said. He gestured to the dark canyon. My horses, my camp. You can, and you will. Elias said, you are in this now. They will hunt you. Get your horses. Meet us at the ranch. You know the way. Ashki looked at Clara. He saw the proof of the attack. He knew the white man's law. He nodded once. I know the way. He vanished back into the shadows. Elias helped Clara into the wagon. He did not ask questions. He just turned the team around and drove, hard, back to the ranch. Dawn was painting the sky gray when Ashki arrived, leading his colts. Elias met him at the corral. Before they could even speak, riders approached. It was Sheriff Pike. The 3 men were with him, The one Ashki had hit held a bloody cloth to his head. The man who had fled looked smug. "Ward," Pike called out. He did not get off his horse. His eyes were cold. "You are harboring an attacker. Assault. I am here for him." He pointed at Ashki. "He is a guest, sheriff," Elias said, his voice even. "He is a vagrant, and he assaulted these men. They were on public land." "They were on my land," Clara cried. She had come out of the house, wrapped in a blanket. "They were moving my marker. They attacked me." Pike's gaze slid over her. He dismissed her. "She is hysterical. These men were checking survey lines for Mr. Hale. This savage attacked them without provocation." "That is a lie," Elias said. "It is my report," Pike said, "and my report is the law. Now, I am fining you, Elias, $5 for harboring this fugitive and for inciting this violence." $5! Elias was outraged. "This is robbery." "Pay it," Pike said, his hand dropping to his gun. "Or I take him to my jail, and I promise you, he will not enjoy his stay." Ashki stepped forward. He looked at Pike, his face unreadable. "I will go," he said in English. "This is not his fight." "No," Elias said, his voice rough. He glared at Pike. "You will not. You win, Sheriff. You win for today." He turned, walked into the house, and returned. He held out $5 silver. Pike urged his horse forward and took them. "You are a fool, Elias. You keep bad company. It will ruin you." He looked at Ashki. "You, Indian, you are not welcome in Dry Creek. You are seen in town again. I will arrest you for vagrancy. You understand me." He wheeled his horse and, followed by Hale's men, rode away. There was a long, heavy silence. Elias looked at the dust cloud. "He is trying to bleed me," he whispered. "He is trying to break me." Clara walked over to Ashki. He stood by his horses, his shoulders set. "You saved me," she said. "I owe you my life, my everything." Ashki looked at her. He nodded once, a short, formal acknowledgement. He kept his distance. This was her world, her fight. He had only been passing through. "They want the water," he said, his voice low. He looked toward the canyon. "The spring." He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "You are safe here, with him." He gestured to Elias. "But do not go back to your cabin. Do not cross the dry bridge after the sun is down. The dark belongs to them now." He turned to Elias. "I will go. I bring you trouble." "You will stay," Elias said, his voice firm. He walked over. "You will work. You know this land. You know how to track. You know how to watch. I need allies. I will pay you a fair wage. Stay in the bunkhouse. Be my eyes." Ashki looked at the old man. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the resolve. He looked at Clara, who was watching him, her face pale but her eyes fierce. He saw the torn dress. He nodded. "I will stay." Later that day, Elias hitched the wagon again. "We need supplies," he said, "and we need to show them we are not afraid." Clara, wearing her last clean dress, sat beside him. Ashki remained at the ranch, as ordered. When they drove into Dry Creek, the town was quiet, too quiet. The stares that followed them were no longer curious. They were hostile. And there was something new, nailed to the door of the church, nailed to the post outside the mercantile. A fresh sheet of paper, black ink. "Protect our morality," the top line screamed. "The sanctity of our homes is threatened. Vipers and mongrels mix. The savage walks among us, harbored by those who have forgotten God. We must cleanse our town a meeting tonight. Deacon Purcell." Elias tore the flyer from the mercantile wall. His hand, old and spotted, was trembling with rage. He crumpled the paper into a tight ball. "He is not just a crow," Elias said, his voice thick. "He is a torch. and he is trying to set the whole territory on fire." The ranch settled into a new, tense rhythm. Life at Warm Spring was not easy, but it was honest. Clara had a place, and she worked for it. From sunup, she was at Elias's side. He had a barn full of tack that had fallen into disrepair, items he had not had the heart to fix or the money to replace since his wife's passing. Clara's hands, so fine they could stitch silk, proved just as strong with an awl and waxed thread. She restitched ripped saddlebags, her needle flashing in the lamplight of the barn. She mended bridles, replacing rotten leather. She was not just a seamstress. She was a mender. It was the same work, she thought, holding broken pieces together. Tlogi Ashki was a shadow, a quiet presence. He did not eat in the main house with them. He took his meals with the ranch hands in the bunkhouse, but he rarely spoke. He spent his days riding the ridges of Elias's land, his black colts trailing him. He was a scout. He watched the dry wash. He watched the road from town. One afternoon, he found Elias staring at a patch of dry ground near the main well. The rancher kicked at the cracked earth. "It is low," Elias said, his voice worried. "Lower than I have ever seen it. If this keeps up, the spring itself will fail by summer." Ashki dismounted and walked to the edge of the property. He knelt, picking a blade of tough, pale grass. He chewed on it, his expression thoughtful. He walked 200 yards west, to a low dip in the land that Elias had always assumed was useless alkali soil. He knelt again. "Here," Ashki said. Elias walked over. "Here, this is a salt flat, son. Nothing grows here." "This," Ashki said, holding up the pale green blade. "Saltgrass. It grows where the water is. Close." He used his hands, showing a short distance. "Shallow, not deep like the spring, but it is here, under the salt." Elias stared at the patch of grass. He had lived on this land for 40 years. He had walked this very spot 1,000 times, and he had never seen it. He looked at Ashki, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "You would dig here?" "My people do," Ashki said simply. He turned and walked back to his horses. A few evenings later, Clara sat on the porch, mending one of her own dresses, the one ripped by Hale's man. She was patching it with a piece of dark blue calico. Ashki walked past, heading from the corral to the bunkhouse. He nodded at her, his usual brief acknowledgement. "Wait," Clara said, her voice soft. He stopped. She had seen it, hanging from his belt, a small, beaded pouch of soft deerskin. It was tied with a loop of dark wool, and the wool was frayed, nearly broken from his fight on the canyon ridge. "Your pouch," she said, pointing with her needle. "The tie is broken." Ashki's hand instinctively went to it. His face was guarded. It was his hozuji, his blessing pouch. It held corn pollen. It was not for Bilagana eyes. "It is nothing," he said. "It will fall," Clara said. She stood up, holding out her spool of thread. It was not the cheap cotton from the mercantile. This was silk thread, strong as wire, that she had kept from her mother. "I can fix it. It is my trade. Thank you for that night." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw no pity. He saw no curiosity. He saw honesty. He saw a woman offering the one skill she had, the same way he had offered his knowledge of the salt grass. Slowly, his fingers untied the pouch from his belt. He did not hand it to her. He held it out. She took it. Her fingers were careful. She sat, and in the fading light, she wrapped the frayed wool with the strong, dark silk thread, stitching it, making it stronger than new. She did not open the pouch. She did not ask what it was. She simply mended what was broken. She finished, bit the thread, and handed it back to him. "It will hold now," she said. He took it, feeling the tight, smooth wrap of the silk. He looked at her. He gave a single, slow nod. He tied the pouch back onto his belt and walked away. It was the first true bond between them. Elias was growing desperate. The fines had hurt him, but the blockade was worse. When his hands rode to town, Henderson's mercantile was suddenly out of the grain he needed. The blacksmith could not find time to reshoe his horses. Pike's trail tax on any wagon leaving Warm Spring Ranch had doubled. "He is choking me," Elias said one night, his big hands clenched on the dinner table. "Hale and Pike, they are choking me off. If I cannot get my cattle to market, I am finished by winter." Clara looked up from her plate. "Is there another way besides the main road?" "Only through the Red Canyon," Elias said. "But it is treacherous, and Hale's men are watching it." Ashki stood in the doorway. He had been listening. "There is another way," he said. Both Clara and Elias looked up. "The Wool Trail," Ashki said. "An old trail. My people use it. It goes north, behind the high cliffs. It avoids the canyon. It avoids the town." Elias stood, his chair scraping. "A trail, can it take wagons?" "No," Ashki said. "Horses, mules. But it is safe. It leads to the settlements on the San Juan River. You can trade there." Elias's face was lit with a sudden, desperate hope. "Will you show me?" Ashki hesitated. This was a boundary. He was showing a white man a dine trail. But he looked at Elias, and he looked at Clara. They were outcasts, just as he was. "I will ride it first," Ashki said. "Alone, I must see if the way is proper. Some places are not for wagons. They are not for trade. They are sacred. If the trail is clear of these places, I will scout it for you. But I will not lead wagons near the high places." "That is fair," Elias said, nodding, his relief palpable. "Whatever you say, just find us a way out, son." The isolation was a physical thing. Deacon Purcell's sermons were now the talk of the territory. His flyers had spread. He preached every Sunday about the den of iniquity at Warm Spring Ranch. He spoke of the Scarlet Woman who had abandoned God and the heathen she lived with. The rumors grew, twisting. By the next week, the story was that Clara was not only Elias's mistress, but that she was shared with the savage he employed. Clara's sewing business, the small orders she still hoped to fill from the ranch, dried up completely. One afternoon, Clara rode to town with Elias, needing to post a letter. She saw Mrs. Gable, a woman who had commissioned 3 new shirts, standing outside the mercantile. "A Mrs. Gable," Clara called, a small hope in her voice. The woman's face turned pale with fright. She grabbed her young son's hand, pulled him close, and hurried across the street, as if Clara were carrying a disease. Clara stopped, her hand frozen in a half-wave. The rejection was complete. She was no longer a person. She was a pariah. She got back in the wagon, her spine rigid. Elias put a hand over hers. "Their souls are small. Clara, do not let them shrink yours." But the world itself seemed to test that. A week later, the sky changed. It began at noon. The light went from white to a sickly, pale yellow. The wind, which had been still, began to sigh. "Dust," Elias said, looking at the northern horizon. "A bad one." Within an hour, the sky was the color of blood. A low, howling moan came from the cliffs, and then the world disappeared. A wall of red dust hit the ranch. It was not like the small dust devils. This was a suffocating, grinding cloud of pulverized earth. It blotted out the sun. Clara ran to the house, stuffing rags under the door. It did no good. The fine, choking dust poured in through every crack. It coated her tongue, her eyes. The air became thick and unbreathable. She began to cough, a dry, painful rasp. The door opened, and Ashki stepped inside. He was wrapped in a blanket, his eyes just visible. He carried a heavy wool blanket, one of his own. It was dripping wet. "This is not good," he said, his voice muffled. "The air is poison. It cuts the lungs." He went to the main window, the one facing the wind, Help me! Together, they pushed the heavy ranch table against the wall. Ashki stood on it and, using nails and a hammer, nailed the soaked wool blanket over the entire window frame. Immediately, the room felt calmer. The screaming of the wind was muffled. The blanket acted as a filter. The air was still thick, but the fine, cutting particles were trapped in the wet wool. They sat in the dim, red light. The storm howled for hours. It was an assault. "My mother," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "She died in winter, but I think this is worse. The cold just takes your breath. This tries to steal it." Ashki sat across from her, his back straight. He was very still. "The Dean called this Niol, the wind that carries the earth. It is a time to be still, to wait." "You are never afraid, are you?" she asked. He was silent for a long moment. "I am afraid," he said, his voice so low she barely heard him. "I am afraid of paper." "Paper." "The Bilagana," he said, using the word for the white people. "Their paper, their treaties, the paper that moved my people from our land, the paper that said we were prisoners." He looked at the floor. "A storm is honest. It tells you it will kill you. Paper smiles. And then it kills you." Clara thought of the lease in her Bible. She thought of the deacon's letter. She understood. Her mother's voice came back to her. "Do not give your heart to a man who hides his face." Ashki's face was not hidden, but his life was. He was a man of shadows and high places, a man who spoke of honest storms and lying paper. She was drawn to his stillness, but she was terrified of the gulf between them. The storm broke at dawn. It left the world coated in a fine red powder. The water troughs were solid mud. The cattle were bawling, their eyes and nostrils caked. Elias was frantic. A small group of new calves, separated in a far pasture, had not been brought in. "The old well in the east pasture," he said, his face gray with worry. "It has to be dry. They will die." "I will go," Clara said. She rode with Elias. The landscape was alien, the familiar dips and rises smoothed over with red dust. When they reached the pasture, the calves were huddled by the well, their tongues out, their cries weak. The well was, as Elias feared, a pit of dried mud. "It is over," Elias said, his voice hollow. "We cannot get them back to the ranch in time." Clara dismounted. She looked around. The world was red, but then she saw it. Near the well, in a low depression, was a patch of pale, tough-looking grass, the salt grass. The dust had not buried it. Mr. Ward," she said, her voice sharp. "Here, give me the shovel." She ran to the spot. She began to dig. The earth was hard, but she was fueled by a desperate hope. She dug, ignoring the blisters forming on her hands. Elias, catching her vision, dug beside her. 1 foot, 2 feet. The ground was still dry. "It is no use, child," he panted. "Keep digging," she insisted. At 3 feet, her shovel hit soft, wet mud. A moment later, a slow, dark trickle of water seeped into the hole. It was not much, but it was water, clean and cold. They dug faster, widening the hole, creating a small pool. The calves, smelling the water, staggered over. They drank. Elias Ward stood back, breathing hard, his face covered in sweat and red mud. He looked at Clara. She was smiling, a real, unguarded smile, the first he had seen. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved them. You listened. You saw what I could not." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. She was not a victim. She was not a pariah. She was a provider. The victory was short-lived. They needed grain. They had to face Dry Creek. Clara and Ellis rode in, the wagon empty. The town was tense. As they tied the wagon near the mercantile, a voice called out, Well, if it is not my little runaway." Clara froze. Jedediah Purcell. He was drunk, leaning against the saloon porch, flanked by two of his friends. "Heard you moved up in the world," Jedediah sneered, his eyes moving over Clara's dusty dress. "Living with the old man now." Clara grabbed Elias's arm, trying to pull him toward the store. "Let's go, Mr. Ward." Jedediah stepped in front of them, blocking their path. His breath was hot with whiskey. "And they say you got the Indian, too. How many men does it take to keep you happy?" "Clara." He reached out, his hand fast, and grabbed her arm. "Come on, tell me, what does the old man pay you?" "Get your hand off her, Jedediah!" Elias's voice was a low growl. He stepped between them, shoving Clara behind him. "Or you will pull back a stump." Jedediah laughed, but his eyes were wary of the old man. "Protecting your property, Ward. You are a pathetic old fool. Everyone in town knows it." He raised his voice for the benefit of the onlookers. "The old rancher finally bought himself a whore." The words hit Clara harder than the mud. Elias did not flinch. "You are your father's son, all mouth and poison. Get out of our way." Jedediah's courage wavered before Elias's cold fury. He spat in the dust at Elias's feet. "Enjoy her while you can, old man. She will bleed you dry." He and his friends stalked back into the saloon, their laughter echoing. Elias turned to Clara. She was shaking, but her eyes were dry and hot with anger. "He is vile," she whispered. "He is a coward," Elias said, but he looked tired, older than he had that morning. The attack was no longer just on Clara. It was on him, on his name. He knew Hale was behind this. Isolate him. Make him a fool. A man protecting his harlot was not a man the other ranchers would support. The circle was tightening. The attack by Jedediah Purcell left a poison in the air. For 2 days, Elias Ward kept his hands, and Clara, close to the ranch. They worked, they mended, but a new, heavy silence had fallen. The ranch felt like a besieged fort. On the 3rd day, Elias knew they had to get supplies. The flour was gone, and the grain for the horses was low. They rode into Dry Creek, the wagon wheels grinding in the ever-present dust. The town was quiet, but it was the quiet of a spiderweb waiting. As they pulled up to the Mercantile, Sheriff Pike stepped out of his office. He was not alone. Mason Hale stood with him, his dark suit immaculate. Hale was smiling. "Elias, Miss Bell," Hale said, his voice smooth and pleasant. "Just the people I wanted to see. You have saved me a trip." Elias said nothing. He looped the reins on the hitching post. "We are here for supplies, Mason." "Of course you are," Hale said. "But first, a small matter of legal priority. Sheriff..." Pike stepped forward. He was not lazy today. His eyes were sharp. He held a sheaf of papers. "Elias Ward, Clara Bell, I am here to serve this notice." He unrolled the top paper. It was thick, official, covered in dark, looping script. "This is a deed of primary claim, filed with the Territorial Land Office in Prescott. It seems Mr. Hale's claim to the lands north of the Dry Creek, including the canyon, predates any other." Clara's heart went cold. "What are you saying?" Hale stepped in, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "What he is saying, my dear, is that your father's lease, the one you hold so dear, it was filed in error. It was filed on land that was already claimed." "That is a lie," Elias growled. "That claim has been in her family for 10 years. "An unfortunate clerical error," Hale said, shrugging. "The railroad survey confirmed my original markers. It seems your little lease, Miss Bell, is null and void." "This is theft!" Clara's voice was high. "This is law," Pike said. He held up the paper. "It is signed by the commissioner, and I am here to enforce it." He took a heavy ink stamp from his pocket. He pressed it to the ink pad on his belt. He slammed it down on the bottom of the paper. The thud was a sound of finality. "Official," Pike said, "by the authority of this territory, I am ordering you, Clara Bell, to vacate the property immediately. You have 48 hours to remove your personal effects. After that, you will be considered a trespasser, and I will arrest trespassers." Clara felt the world tilt, the cabin, the land. It was not just a shack. It was the last piece of her father. This paper, this lie, was erasing him. Elias stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You forged this. Hale, you bought some clerk in Prescott, and you forged it." Hale's smile did not waver. "You are free to contest it, in Prescott. But in Dry Creek, my deed stands, and Sheriff Pike enforces it." He looked at Clara. 48 hours. Miss Bell, the clock is running. Good day to you." Hale and Pike turned and walked back into the sheriff's office, the door closing behind them with a solid, unforgiving sound. They did not buy supplies. Elias turned the wagon around and drove back to the ranch, his face a mask of cold fury. He did not speak until they were back on the porch. He paced, his heavy boots striking the wood. "He has us. He has us. He has Pike. He has the paper. He has the law. He can print any lie he wants, and Pike will stamp it into truth." Clara sank onto the porch swing, her body numb. She had fought. She had endured the shame, the assault, and she had lost. A piece of paper had beaten her. She looked at her hands. She thought of the men on the ridge. She thought of the square nail. "No," she said. Elias stopped pacing. "What?" "No," she said again, her voice stronger. She stood up. "He has a paper, but we have the truth. We have the real marker, the one they pulled from the ground. We can dig it up. We have the horseshoe print." Elias ran a hand through his gray hair. "And what do we do? Clara walk into Pike's office? He will laugh, and then he will arrest us." "Not Pike's office," she said, her eyes flashing. "Not his court, the district court, in Prescott, the one Hale filed his lie in. We will file the truth." Elias stared at her. The idea was mad. Prescott was 100 miles, a hard, dangerous ride, through hostile territory. But it was not impossible. 100 miles, he said, thinking aloud. "And Pike controls the road. We would never make it. His men would stop us before we got 10 miles. They would invent a charge. Resisting arrest, vagrancy, God knows what." "We will not take the road," Clara said, her gaze lifting to the north, to the jagged red line of the canyon. "We will go through the canyon, the way he watches." They both turned. Talogi Ashki was there. He was always there, a silent watcher. He stood by the corral, mending a leather strap, his black colts grazing behind him. He had heard. He walked over to them, his movements economical. "The canyon," he said. His voice was flat. "Can it be done?" Elias asked. "Can you get us through south to the Prescott Trail?" Ashki's eyes scanned the horizon. He looked north, to the high peaks, barely visible, where the San Juan River began. He was silent for a long time. "It is a bad time," he said. "We do not have a good time," Clara said, her voice desperate. "We have 48 hours. "The snow is melting in the high places." Ashki said, "The water in the canyon is fast. It is high. It is a trap for those who do not know it." "But you know it," Elias said. It was not a question. Ashki looked at Clara. He saw her face. He saw the desperation. He saw the fight. He remembered his own words. "I am afraid of paper." He saw the Bilagana paper, held in Pike's hand. He saw the same weapon being used. "Yes," he said, "I know it." "Can you get us through?" Elias asked again. Ashki nodded. "Once. We ride light, no wagon, only what we can carry. 3 horses. We leave before the moon sets, before dawn." The ranch house was dark. 3 hours before dawn. They led their horses from the barn, Elias on his steady gelding, carrying a rifle in his saddle scabbard, Clara on a calm mare, Ashki on his muscular pony. His string of colts was left in the corral. He had told them, in his own language, to wait. They did not take the road. They cut east, across the dry plains, their hooves making soft thuds in the dust. The moon was a sliver, casting just enough light to see the dark shape of the canyon mouth ahead. It was a narrow crack in the earth, a place the rock had split. They entered in single file, Ashki in the lead, Clara, then Elias. The air inside was instantly cold. The walls rose up on either side, sheer cliffs of red rock that blotted out the last of the moonlight. They were in a river of shadow. The only sound was the clink of horseshoes on the stone bed of the dry wash. They rode for an hour in the darkness. Clara's heart was a hammer in her chest. Every shadow looked like a man. Every falling pebble sounded like a boot. A faint light began to grow ahead of them. Dawn. The canyon was widening. And then the sound came, a high, thin whee that zipped past Elias's head. It was followed by the sharp crack of a rifle, echoing, bouncing off the canyon walls until it sounded like it was coming from everywhere. A chip of rock exploded from the wall near Clara's head. "They knew," Elias yelled, pulling his horse to a rearing halt. "Pike's men, they are on the rim!" Clara's mare screamed, trying to bolt, spinning in the narrow pass. "Ride!" Ashki's voice was not a yell. It was a sharp, clear command that cut through the panic. "Ride fast! Do not stop! Follow me!" Another shot, then another. They were not trying to kill. They were trying to panic the horses, to send them tumbling. Ashki spurred his pony. He turned, not following the main wash, but heading straight for what looked like a solid wall of rock. Clara, trusting him, spurred her mare, leaning low over the horse's neck. At the last second, she saw it, a side passage, a narrow cut, hidden by a fold in the rock. Ashki plunged into it. Clara followed, her legs scraping the stone wall. Elias was right behind her. They were in near total darkness. The passage was barely wide enough for a horse. The sound of the rifles was instantly muffled, distant. They slowed, the horses panting, their flanks soaked in sweat. "Heavens above," Elias whispered, his voice shaking. "They were waiting for us. Pike must have sent them as soon as we left." "They will not follow in here," Ashki said. His voice was calm. "The rock is bad. Their horses are not trained for it. We are safe. For now." They rode for hours. The narrow passage finally opened up, but not into a canyon. They were on a high ledge, overlooking the main wash. The view was breathtaking. The world was carved from red and orange stone. The cliffs were 1,000 feet high, sculpted by wind into towers and bridges. The sky above was a thin, perfect ribbon of deep blue. It was majestic, but Clara was right. It felt angry. The silence was heavy, oppressive. "This land holds memories," Elias said, as if reading her mind. He looked at the vast, empty space. "It remembers." They found a small, sheltered spot under an overhang to make camp. It was late afternoon. Ashki gathered a small pile of dry, smokeless greasewood. They would not risk a real fire. They sat, chewing on dry biscuits and jerky. The silence between them was thick. Elias stared at the canyon wall, his face etched with lines Clara had never seen before. "I know this place," he said, his voice quiet, rough. Ashki, who was checking his horse's hoof, paused. He looked at Elias. He waited. "I was stationed here," Elias said. He was not looking at them. He was looking at the past. "After the war, 1866, I wore the blue coat. I was cavalry." Clara stopped breathing. She looked at Ashki. His face was stone. "I was young," Elias said, his voice cracking. I thought we were bringing order, taming the land. I thought we were the righteous ones." He let out a long, shuddering breath. We were," We were monsters. He looked at Ashki, his eyes filled with a shame so old and deep it was bottomless. I was at Fort Sumner, he said. Wieldy. I was one of the guards. I watched your people. I saw the sickness. I saw the starvation. I was there, and I followed orders. Clara put a hand to her mouth. I could not live with it, Elias whispered. I could not be that man. I took my discharge. I came here. I built the ranch. I found the spring. I thought, if I give away the water, if I am a good man, I can wash my hands. I can atone. He gave a short, bitter laugh. But you cannot. The stain does not come out. He looked directly at Ashki. I am sorry. For what I was, for what my people did, I do not ask. I cannot ask for forgiveness, but I wanted you to know. This fight, against Hale, against that paper, it feels like the first right thing I have done in 30 years. A chance to stand on the correct side. Ashki was silent for a long time. The only sound was the wind, sighing high up on the rims. My grandmother's sister, Ashki said, his voice flat, died at Wieldy, of the coughing sickness. My aunt died on the walk back. Her feet, they were gone. Elias closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping. You cannot change what was, Ashki said, his voice still quiet. You are not that soldier now. You are Elias. You gave her. He nodded at Clara. A coat. You gave me work. You stand against the man with the paper. That is the truth for today. We ride together. It was not forgiveness. It was something harder. It was acknowledgement. Clara felt her throat tighten. She saw them both. Two men haunted by the past. She felt her own ghosts rise up. My father, she said, her voice small. He went on a cattle drive to Kansas. That was 4 years ago, 1873. Elias looked at her, his expression softening. I remember that drive. It was a bad one. Early blizzards. He promised he would be back by winter, Clara said, staring at her own hands, at the calluses forming over the needle pricks. We never got a letter. No one ever rode back to say what happened. He vanished. The trail just ate him. I keep sewing, mending, trying to fix things. But I could not fix that. I could not keep him here. Ashki listened. He heard her story. He heard the hole in it. He recognized the shape of loss. He touched the mended pouch at his belt, the one Clara had fixed. My grandmother, he said. She weaves. She taught me to spin. She said, when the world is chaos, when you are in Wieldy, you find the thread. You find K. He searched for the word. Family, connection, the earth. You find the thread. And you spin it. You spin it from adversity. You make your own pattern. You do not let them make it for you. Spin thread from adversity, Clara repeated, the words landing inside her. She looked at Elias with his old shame. She looked at Ashki with his deep, quiet strength. I think I know what home is, now, she said softly. I used to think it was just a roof, a place to be safe from the cold. I told you, Elias said, his voice rough. It is where you are seen. It is more, Clara said, looking at them both, her two strange, damaged, honorable companions. It is where you are chosen, where someone looks at you, all your broken pieces, all your shame, and they choose you. They stand with you. They ride into the canyon with you. A fragile peace settled over the small camp. A new family, born of necessity and truth, sat under the red cliffs. The moment broke. Ashki stood up, his body suddenly tense. He walked to the edge of the overhang, sniffing the air, looking up the canyon. The sliver of sky was gone. It had been replaced by a dark, bruised, purple-black mass of clouds. What is it? Clara asked, rising. The air, Ashki said. It is heavy, thick. A low, distant sound began. It was not a rumble. It was a vibration, a deep, steady hum that seemed to come from the rock itself. Thunder, Elias asked, reaching for his rifle. No, Ashki said, his voice sharp. He was looking north, up the canyon. The headwaters, the high peaks, the clouds are sitting on them, black, like a wound. It is raining. Hard. Up there. The vibration grew, stronger. They could feel it in the soles of their boots. The water, Ashki said. He turned, his face urgent, all calm gone. It is coming. We have to climb. Now. He kicked the small pile of smoking embers, scattering them. Leave it, get the horses high ground now. The roar was a physical blow. It was not thunder. It was the sound of the earth unzipping. Ashki had them scrambling up a fissure in the rock, pulling the terrified horses. Just as a wall of brown, churning water, 10 feet high, tore through the canyon pass. It was filled with boulders and uprooted trees. They were trapped on a high, narrow ledge for a full day and a night, watching the world they had known boil and tear itself apart below them. The path to Prescott was gone, buried under 1,000 tons of mud and rock. Their path back to the ranch was just as impassable. There is one way down, Ashki said, his voice grim. The flood had receded, leaving a canyon slick with wet, stinking mud. A goat path. It is not good. It leads east, back, toward the town. They had no choice. They arrived on the outskirts of Dry Creek just after noon. They were not a challenge to the law. They were 3 survivors, caked in mud, their horses limping, their bodies hollowed out with exhaustion. And the town was waiting for them. The entire population of Dry Creek was gathered in the main street, facing the church. It was not a market. It was an audience. On the top step, Deacon Purcell was in the middle of a sermon. He saw them. A look of rapturous, divine fury crossed his face. He raised his long arm, his finger pointing. "Behold," he thundered. His voice carried across the silent street. "The sinners driven from the canyon by God's own righteous flood. He has turned them back. He has delivered them to us for judgment." Clara, Elias, and Ashki stopped, the crowd parting, forming a wide, hostile circle around them. "Deacon," Elias said, his voice a low, exhausted rasp. He dismounted, his joints stiff. "This is madness. Let us pass." "Pass," Purcell cried. "You will pass to judgment. You fled the law, this fallen woman, this old fool who harbors her, and the heathen who guides them in their sin." "This is not a court, Purcell," Elias said, moving to stand in front of Clara's horse. "It is the court of the Almighty." Sheriff Pike stepped forward, flanked by Mason Hale. Pike was smiling. "It is also the court of the territory. Elias, your 48 hours expired yesterday. This woman," he pointed at Clara, "is officially a trespasser. Her claim is void." "You know that deed is a forgery?" Elias shouted, his fatigue replaced by a cold rage. "I know what the paper says," Pike said, "and I am here to evict her." "You will have to come through me," Elias said. He was an old man, covered in mud, his face drawn, but he was immovable. The crowd surged, their fear of the flood now turned to a hot, righteous anger. "Get them out!" a man yelled. "Cleanse this town." Jedediah Purcell, his face red and bloated from morning whiskey, pushed to the front. He was carrying a thick hickory stick. "Get out of the way, old man. We are here for the whore." He shoved Elias. Elias shoved him back. "That is enough, boy." Jedediah's face contorted. He raised the stick and swung it, hard. It struck Elias on the shoulder, a crack of wood on bone. The old man cried out, staggering, his hand flying to his shoulder, but he did not fall. He set his feet, his teeth gritted in pain, a shield of old, stubborn bones. "I said," he gasped. "Enough." Ashki was off his horse. He moved with a liquid quiet. He was not looking at Jedediah. He was looking at Pike. He reached into his saddlebag. He pulled out a heavy, cloth-wrapped object. It was a square of dried, hard earth. He had ridden to her cabin before they left, in the dark, and carved it from the ground. He held it up. "This," he said, his voice clear and sharp, cutting through the murmurs. "The proof, the mark of the square nail, from her land, from Hale's horse." The crowd stared. They did not understand. "What is that?" Pike sneered, his hand dropping to his gun. "Some kind of savage magic, a block of dirt?" "It is Bilagana law," Ashki said, his eyes locking with Hale's. "It is the track of your lie." "Go back to the reservation, you filth!" a man shouted. "This is a white town." "He is not filth." Clara's voice was high and shaking, but she would not be silent. She slid from her horse, wincing as her feet hit the ground. "He is an honest man. He is a better man than any of you." The words, her defense of him, were a spark on gasoline. Jedediah Purcell let out a roar of pure, drunken fury. "You defend him, you... He lunged. He did not lunge at Ashki. He lunged at Clara. "You harlot!" He grabbed the front of her dress. The cotton was old, weakened by the flood, caked with mud. He yanked it, a vicious, tearing motion. The sound of ripping fabric was the only sound in the street. The skirt tore away in his hand. He was left holding a handful of wet, muddy cloth. Clara stood, frozen. She was in her petticoat. It was thin, soaked, clinging to her. Her legs were bare, scratched and muddy. She was exposed, utterly. A man gasped. A woman shrieked. And then, worst of all, a man in the back laughed. A high, ugly, breaking sound. Then another. They were laughing, pointing. This was it. The final, unbearable shame. This was worse than the mud, worse than the lies. She closed her eyes, wishing the flood had taken her. The laughter stopped. It was choked off. Ashki had moved. He did not hit Jedediah, not with his fist. He used his open hand, a hard, flat shove against the man's chest, sending him sprawling into the dust. Clara was trembling violently, her hands trying to cover herself, a small, animal sound of terror trapped in her throat. Ashki turned his back to the crowd. He was shielding her from their eyes. He unslung the heavy, woven wool blanket from his own saddle. He said something to her, very low, in his own language. It was not a command, it was a comfort. He wrapped the blanket, his blanket, around her waist, tucking it in, covering her from her ribs to her ankles. It was warm from his horse, smelling of sage and smoke. The street was dead silent. He looked at her face. She was crying now, but not like before. These were the tears of a complete and total breaking. They ran, hot and silent, down her muddy cheeks. He put one arm under her knees. He put the other around her back, and he lifted her. He held her against his chest, her head falling against his shoulder. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. It was not the act of a brute. It was not possession. It was a coronation of her dignity. He was lifting her out of the filth, above the laughter, away from the pointing fingers. He was declaring, without a word, that she was not what they called her. She was something to be protected. He held her, turned, and walked toward his horse. The crowd of hard, cruel men and pious, judging women, they parted for him. They stepped back. No one spoke. No one met his eyes. He mounted his horse in one fluid motion, settling her in front of him, her face hidden against his chest. Elias Ward, clutching his shoulder, his face white with pain but his eyes blazing with a terrible, righteous pride, picked up his rifle, grabbed the reins of his own horse and Clara's, and followed. They rode out of Dry Creek, leaving the silent, shame town behind them. The ride to the ranch was a blur. Clara did not move. She just clung to him. the wool blanket a shield. He did not take her to the bunkhouse. He carried her through the front door of the main ranch house. Maria saw them, and her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with fear and understanding. He carried her down the hall, to the guest room, the room she had fled. He placed her gently on the bed, on top of the quilt. She was still wrapped in his blanket, curled on her side, shaking. He stood back, his face a mask. He had given her dignity in the street. He would give her privacy here. "You are safe," he said. His voice was low, formal. "The door is strong. Maria is in the house. I will be outside." He was respecting her. He was giving her the choice. He turned to leave. "Do not!" Her voice was a small, broken sound, barely audible. He stopped. "Please," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Do not go." He turned back. He stood in the dim light of the room. She opened her eyes. They were raw, swollen. The steel was gone. The spine that had held her up was broken. A sob tore out of her, a sound of such profound, animal grief that it filled the room. It was the sound of a life breaking apart. She curled tighter, her shoulders shaking, and she wept. She wept for her mother's death, for her lost father, for the deacon's lies, for Jedediah's hands, for the sound of the laughter. She wept for the girl she had been, who was now, she thought, gone forever. Ashki did not move. He stood. He let her break. He let her empty the poison. He knew this, too. He knew grief. He let it have its space. The sobs quieted, after a long time, to ragged, hitching breaths. The room was dark. He left the room. She heard his boots on the wood floor. A fresh wave of despair hit her. He had left her. The door opened again. He was back. He was carrying something. It was one of his weavings, a small, soft blanket, the one he used himself, woven in the colors of the high desert sunset. He did not touch her. He did not try to wipe her tears. He simply unfolded it and held it out to her. She looked at the blanket, then at him. Slowly, her hands shaking. She reached out and took it. The wool was soft, warm, alive. She pressed it to her face. "They took everything," she whispered, her voice a ruin. "I have no land. I have no name. I am what they called me." "No," Ashki said. His voice was quiet, but it was as firm as the red rock. "They took nothing. The land is still the land. Your name is your name. Their words are wind." She looked at him, a shadow in the darkness. "I'm so cold." He nodded, moving toward the door again. "I will get more blankets for the fire." "No," she said, her voice a little stronger. She pushed herself up on one elbow. She held out her hand. Her hand, which was so used to mending, was now asking, "Stay, please. I do not want to be alone tonight." Her hand hung in the air between them. A choice, a bridge. He looked at her small, calloused hand. He saw the tremor in it. He understood the courage it took to ask. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took her hand. His was warm, strong, his grip enveloping hers. A long, shuddering breath left her. It was the breath she had been holding for years. She tugged, gently. "Hold me," she whispered. It was not the plea of a victim. It was the request of a survivor. He sat on the edge of the bed. He did not pull her. He waited. Clara shifted, turning her body, still wrapped in his larger blanket. She moved into his arms. She put her head on his shoulder, her own arms wrapping around his waist, clutching the rough cotton of his shirt. He put his arms around her. He held her. He held her securely, his hand resting on the small of her back, the other hand on her hair, his fingers gentle. He held her as he had in the street, not with hunger, but with an absolute, grounding protection. They sat like that as the room turned from gray to black. Her breathing slowed. The shaking stopped. He said nothing. He just held her, a solid, warm presence in the darkness, as she found the first small thread of herself again. The roar had followed them. The goat path had been a treacherous, muddy slide, but it had led them out, high onto the eastern ridge. From there, they saw not a town, but an inland sea of churning, brown water. The sound they had heard in the canyon, the vibration of the earth, had been the water. Now, that water had arrived. The dry creek, normally a scar of dust and pebbles, was a quarter-mile wide torrent. It had ripped through the low-lying houses, turning the main street into a river. "God have mercy," Elias whispered, clutching his injured shoulder. As they watched, horrified, a huge, uprooted cottonwood tree, carried on the crest of the flood, slammed into the wooden bridge. The timbers splintered. The bridge groaned, twisted, and then tore apart, the pieces swallowed instantly by the brown, angry water. A collective shriek rose from the town. The town was cut in two. "The schoolhouse!" Clara cried. She pointed, her hands shaking. The small school, run by the teacher, Miss Albright, was on the low bank near their side of the creek. The water was already swirling around its foundation, and on the porch, huddled together, were 3 small children and the teacher, their faces white with terror. They were cut off. "The rope," Ashki said. He was already pulling the lariats from their saddles. He looked at Elias. "You are hurt." "I can ride," Elias said, his face grim. "No," Ashki commanded. "You stay, you hold the anchor." He turned to Clara. "We must get them." They plunged their exhausted horses down the muddy slope. The water was icy, filled with debris. The horses fought it, rolling their eyes. But Ashki drove his pony forward, finding purchase on the high ground near the school. People were shouting from the other side, the main part of town, but they were helpless. The creek was too wide, too fast. Clara saw the townsfolk who lived on their side, climbing to the high ground of the ranch, their faces blank with shock. She grabbed Maria, who was standing frozen by the ranch house. "Maria, coffee. Get the big pot. Now. Blankets. Any food we have." Clara was no longer a victim. She was not the pariah. She was the only one thinking. She ran to the porch, grabbed an axe, and began splitting wood for a huge fire, a beacon, a kitchen, a center. This was her work. Ashki had reached the schoolhouse. The water was chest deep, pulling at him. He tied one rope around his waist, handing the other end to Elias. "Do not let go," he said. He waded through the surge, disappearing, then reappearing on the porch. He tied the rope to the strongest post. He gathered the first child, a small boy, and strapped him to his back. "Pull," he yelled. "Slow, steady." Elias and one of the ranch hands leaned back, pulling the rope taut, helping Ashki fight the current as he carried the boy back to dry land. Clara, having started the fire, ran back to the bank. Ashki was going back for the second child. "Mr. Ward," a man yelled. It was Henderson, the mercantile owner, who lived on their side. "The bank, it is going." Elias was standing on a low overhang, his boots sinking in the mud as he braced the rope. The water was eating the earth from under him. He tried to step back, but his injured shoulder made him slow. The bank dissolved. With a low groan, the entire section of mud collapsed, and Elias vanished into the torrent. "No!" Clara screamed. The rope went slack. Ashki, halfway to the school, was pulled off balance, vanishing under the brown water for a precious second. Clara saw Elias's head break the surface. He was being swept downstream, toward the wreckage of the bridge. He was a weak swimmer, and his arm was useless. Ashki resurfaced, gasping. He saw Elias. He did not hesitate. He roared, a word in his own language, a sound of pure fury. He untied the rope from his waist and dove, swimming with the current, his powerful strokes cutting through the debris, chasing the old man. "The rope!" Clara screamed at the ranch hand. "Give me the rope!" She grabbed the wet lariat. She ran along the bank, her skirt catching, trying to get ahead of them. Ashki reached Elias. He grabbed the old man's collar, holding his head above water, but they were both being pulled fast toward the deadly tangle of broken timbers. Clara stopped. She had one chance. She had to throw it. She held the end of the rope. Her hands were shaking, slippery with mud. She thought of Ashki. She thought of the barn. 2 weeks ago, he had been mending a cinch strap, showing her how to tie a knot that would hold a wild horse. "No," he had said, guiding her clumsy fingers. "This way. A loop that does not slip. A loop you can trust your life to." Her fingers, though numb, moved. She formed the loop, a running bowline. She made it wide. "Ashki!" she screamed, her voice tearing. He heard her. He turned his head, still holding Elias. She swung the rope, once, twice, and threw it with all the strength of her body. The loop sailed, uncoiling, and landed in the water just upstream of them. It was a perfect throw. Ashki released Elias for a fraction of a second, lunged, and caught the loop. He worked it, his arms burning under Elias's shoulders, pulling it tight. "Pull," he bellowed. Clara screamed at the ranch hand, Henderson, and another man, "Pull, pull now!" They grabbed the rope, falling back, digging their heels into the mud. The rope snapped taut, threatening to break. Clara wrapped it around her own hands, ignoring the burn as the hemp tore her skin. They pulled, foot by agonizing foot, against the power of the flood. They dragged both men out. Ashki and Elias collapsed on the bank, a tangle of limbs, mud, and rope. Elias was unconscious. Ashki was breathing in great, ragged gasps. "Get him to the house," Clara commanded. They carried Elias. Ashki pushed himself to his knees. He looked at the schoolhouse. Miss Albright and the last child were still there. He stood up, his body shaking with cold and exhaustion, and began wading back into the water. It took another hour, but he got them. All of them. From the far bank, the town watched. They saw the whole thing. They saw Elias fall. They saw Ashki dive. They saw Clara throw the rope. They also saw Mason Hale and Sheriff Pike. The two men had arrived, not to help, but to assess. Hale had a large stack of cut timber, supplies for the railroad, piled near the creek bed. The water was now licking at the bottom layer. The blacksmith, Silas, a big man with arms like tree trunks, had seen the rescue. He grabbed a coil of rope from his shop. "I'm going," he yelled to Pike. "They need another strong arm." He started to run toward a narrow, shallow spot upstream. Pike grabbed his arm. "Hold on, Silas." "Let go of me. Sheriff, they are still stranded. Mr. Hale has property at risk," Pike said, his voice cold and flat, carrying over the roar of the water. "That timber is worth $500. I need you to secure it." "Secure the timber?" Silas stared, his face turning purple. "Did you see what just happened? The children?" "The children are safe," Mason Hale said, stepping forward. He never raised his voice. "The Indian has them. That timber is vital to this town's future. To the railroad. Secure it. Silas." "That is an order." Silas looked from Hale to Pike, and then across the water. He saw Ashki, half carrying Miss Albright through the mud. He looked at the stack of wood. He turned back to Pike. "Go to hell," he said. He ripped his arm from the sheriff's grip and ran. The crowd saw it. Henderson, the mercantile owner, had been on the far bank. He saw it. Jedediah Purcell, sobered by the flood, saw it. The entire town, standing on the high ground, had seen Mason Hale and Sheriff Pike choose lumber over lives. By nightfall, the flood had begun to recede. The ranch house was a refugee camp. The fire Clara had built was a beacon. She was ladling hot soup, her hands wrapped in bandages, her face stained with soot and mud. Miss Albright was sitting by the fire, her arms around the 3 children. She looked at Clara. I, she began, but she just cried. Silas, the blacksmith, was there, drinking coffee. Henderson was there. Even the saloon owner, his shirt muddy, was there. The social wall of Dry Creek had been washed away. Later, in the quiet, Clara sat at Elias's desk. The old man was sleeping, his shoulders set and wrapped by Maria. He was breathing. He was alive. Clara opened the ranch ledger. She dipped a pen in the ink. She was not a seamstress tonight. She was a historian. She wrote the date. She wrote flood hits Dry Creek, bridge destroyed. She wrote schoolhouse isolated. T. Ashkey of the Dine rescued Miss Albright and 3 children using a rope line. She wrote Elias Ward, attempting to assist, was swept into the flood. T. Ashkey dove in pursuit. She wrote Clara Bell through the securing rope. Both men recovered alive. Then she stopped. She took a deep breath. She dipped the pen again. On the far bank, Sheriff Pike and Mason Hale detained Silas, the blacksmith, preventing him from aiding the rescue. They ordered him to save Mr. Hale's timber assets instead. Several citizens witnessed this. Silas refused the order and assisted the rescue. She wrote his name. She wrote all their names. It was a record. It was proof. It was a weapon. The last of the townspeople left, heading back to their muddy, ruined homes. Clara found Ashkey by the corral. He was rubbing down his horse, his movements slow, methodical. He was soaked, his body shivering, but he tended to his animal first. She came to him with a steaming mug of coffee and a thick wool blanket. He stopped, but he did not turn. "Thank you," she said. The words were small, tiny, for what he had done. "You saved him. You saved all of them." "You saved us," he said, his voice rough. "That was a good throw. The knot held." She stood beside him. "The town, they are looking at you differently." "Today," he said, "they are wet. They are scared. Today, I am a hero." He turned to look at her, his eyes dark. "Tomorrow, the mud will be dry, and I will be the savage again." The old fear, the one she had felt in the guest room, returned. "And me, what will I be?" "They will call you the harlot who saved the town," he said, his voice flat, honest. "It will always be both. They will never let you forget what they think you are." She flinched. The truth of it hurt. "Then what is the point? We saved them. And my name is still mud. My land is gone. It is all for nothing." "It is not for nothing," he said, turning to face her fully. "You have the truth." He nodded toward the house, toward the ledger. "You wrote it." "And you?" she asked, her voice dropping. You chose to dive after him. You chose to stay. I saw your face when Elias told you about Fort Sumner. You hate us, our people." "No," he said, his voice low. "I do not hate. I am wary. I have seen what happens when my people get close to yours. It ends. In blood. In paper. It always ends." "So you are leaving," she whispered, "now that this is done." He looked at her bandaged hands, her strong, stubborn face. He remembered the feel of her hand, reaching for his in the dark. "This fight is not done," he said. "Hale still has his paper. Pike still has his badge. The flood, it only washed the board clean. The pieces are still there." He stepped closer. "I cannot promise what will be. Clara, I cannot be what you want. A rancher, a white man. I am dying. My path is north." "I know," she said, her heart breaking. "But not today," he said, "and not tomorrow. I told you, I choose you. I choose this fight. I choose to stand with the man who was a soldier and the woman who throws the rope." She looked up at him. The fear was still there, but something else was growing underneath it, a resolve as hard as the canyon rock. "I am tired of being afraid," she said. "I am tired of running from their words." She took a deep breath. I choose to stay. I choose to fight." I choose the place that has the truth. She met his gaze. And the place that has you. The journey to Prescott was not a secret. The flood had washed away the main road, but it had also washed away the town's fear of Sheriff Pike. When Elias, his arm in a sling, hitched his wagon, he was not alone. Silas, the blacksmith, rode up on his heavy draft horse. He carried a shotgun. "I was a witness, Mr. Ward," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I will speak what I saw." Henderson, the mercantile owner, came next, his face pale but resolute. "My ledger shows the credit I refused you on Pike's advice. I will show the court how they use commerce to strangle. Even Miss Albright, the teacher, insisted on coming. That man," she said, looking at Ashki with a raw, new respect, "saved my children, and that woman," she looked at Clara, "fed us. I will not be silent." They rode out of Dry Creek in a small, determined procession, a wagon and 4 riders. Clara sat on the wagon bench, the ranch ledger in her lap. Next to her, Elias held the reins in his one good hand. Ashki rode his pony alongside, his gaze sweeping the broken land. He carried the cloth-wrapped block of earth in his saddlebag, along with the old, rusted government survey marker they had dug up from Clara's land. Sheriff Pike watched them go. He stood on the porch of his office, his arms crossed. He did not try to stop them. He could not arrest half the town's business owners, but his face was a promise of a fight to come. The district court in Prescott was a different world. It was a solid brick building, with a polished wooden floor and a large, stained United States flag hanging behind the judge's bench. The judge was a man named Harlan, an appointee from the East, with a face that tolerated no nonsense and a beard trimmed sharp as an axe. Mason Hale was already there. He was not muddy. He was dressed in a fine black suit, his boots polished. He sat with a lawyer, a fast-talking man from St. Louis with a silver watch chain and amused, arrogant eyes. Their small, dusty group filed in and sat on the hard benches. "The court calls the matter of Hale versus Bell," the judge said, his voice filling the room. "A territorial claim dispute. Hale's lawyer, Mr. Drexler, rose. He was smooth. He laid Hale's pristine stamp deed on the judge's bench. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter. My client, Mr. Mason Hale, a pillar of the community in Dry Creek, holds the primary, filed, and stamped deed to the lands in question. A deed, I might add, which was crucial for the survey of the incoming railroad, a project vital to this territory's future." He gestured to Clara. "The defendant, a Miss Clara Bell, is a woman of no property who has been living as a vagrant, first in a shack on Mr. Hale's land, and now, under the protection of Mr. Elias Ward." He let the insinuation hang in the air. "This is not a matter of character, Mr. Drexler," Judge Harlan said, his voice sharp. "It is a matter of paper." "Exactly, Your Honor, and our paper is in order. The defense has no paper. We ask for a summary judgment." "The defense wishes to call witnesses." Elias's young lawyer, a nervous man named Finch, said, his voice squeaking. "Very well." The first witness was Deacon Purcell. He was called by Hale. He strode to the stand, a black crow in a clean room. "Deacon," Drexler said, his voice oozing respect, "you are the moral compass of Dry Creek. Tell us about the defendant." Purcell placed his hand on the Bible. "She is a lost soul, a brazen woman. She refused a good marriage. She lives openly with men, shaming the community." He looked at the judge. "Her word, sir, is worthless. She is a vessel of confusion and strife. She brought this trouble on herself." Next, Pike was called. He lied with a flat, bored confidence. He testified that Clara's lease was a known forgery. He testified that her cabin was a place of ill repute. He testified that Hale's men had been surveying and were attacked by the savage Elias Ward employed. He denied the flood incident. "I was maintaining order. Your Honor, people were panicked. I was protecting vital private property, as is my duty. Then Mr. Finch, Clara's lawyer, stood up. The defense calls Mr. Elias Ward. Elias walked to the stand, his arm in the sling, his old face grim. He took the oath. Mr. Ward, Finch said, please explain your relationship to Miss Bell. She is my employee, Elias said, his voice filling the room. And my ward. I am protecting her from men like him. He pointed at Hale. Objection, Drexler shouted. Sustained. Mr. Ward, stick to the facts. The fact, Your Honor, Elias said, turning to the judge, is that Mr. Hale's deed is a lie. But before I prove it, I must place my own truth before this court. The judge raised an eyebrow. My name is Elias Ward, from 1866 to 1868. I was a trooper in the United States Cavalry. I was stationed at Fort Sumner, Wheeldee. A gasp went through the courtroom. Ashki, sitting in the back, did not move. His face was granite. I was a guard, Elias said, his voice thick. I watched the Dine people, the Navajo, starve. I watched them die, and I followed orders. I honored the paper and the uniform over what my God told me was right. He paused, his one good hand gripping the rail. I have spent 30 years trying to wash the shame of that from my hands. I will not stand by and watch another man use fraudulent paper and a tin star badge to steal land from a person who has none. I will not follow that order. Drexler was on his feet. Your Honor, this is a circus. What does this ancient history have to do with this land claim? It has everything to do with it, Elias roared. It is about how land is taken. It is about the honor of a man's word. He looked at the judge. As a sign of my repentance, Your Honor, and as a public record, I am petitioning this court to recognize the Dine Wool Trail as a protected public right-of-way and to register my own spring, Warm Spring, as a public trust. I am done with false paper. I am here for the truth. The judge was silent, his eyes fixed on Elias. I am allowing it, he said over Drexler's sputtering. It speaks to motive and character. The defense calls Tologi Ashki. Ashki walked to the stand. A nervous whisper went through the room. A translator was called, an old man who looked tired of both worlds. Ask him his name and where he is from. The judge said. Ashki spoke in Dine, his voice quiet, melodic, and strong. The translator said, he says his name is Textile Youth. He is Dine. He says, I am of the Black Streak Wood people, born for the water's edge. He says he is from the land of the Red Rocks. Drexler rolled his eyes. Can we get to the point? Ask him what he knows of this dispute, the judge said. Ashki spoke again. He says, I was there. I saw the men pull the marker. The true marker. He nodded to the rusted survey marker in Finch's hand. He says, I saw them hammer in a false one. A baseless accusation, Drexler said. His word against 3 honest citizens. Ask him how he knows. Finch said. Ashki spoke, and the translator nodded. He says, I saw the horse. He unwrapped the heavy block of dried earth. He placed it on the railing. He says, this is the earth from her land. This is the mark. Drexler laughed. A block of mud, Your Honor. This is insulting. Ashki spoke again, his voice sharp. He says, this is the track of the horse, the iron. It had 1 nail, a square nail, not round, a forged nail. It belongs to the man in the suit. He pointed at Hale. A fantasy, Hale shouted, standing up. He is a liar. Sit down, Mr. Hale, the judge ordered. How could you possibly know this? Drexler sneered at Ashki. I do not know, Ashki said in his own slow, perfect English. The court went silent. But he does. He pointed to the back of the courtroom. The defense calls Mr. Silas. Silas the blacksmith walked forward. He was terrified, his big hands crushing the brim of his hat. He took the oath. "Mr. Silas," Finch said, his voice gaining strength, "you are the blacksmith in Dry Creek." "Yes, sir, I am." "Do you recognize this mark?" Finch asked, showing him the print in the hard earth. Silas stared at it. He licked his lips. He looked at Mason Hale, who was watching him, his eyes like two pieces of cold steel. Silas looked back at the judge. "Yes, sir," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. "I do." "How?" Because I made it. Mr. Hale, he brought me a set of shoes from back east. One was loose. I did not have the right nail. I had to use an old square-headed forged nail. It was a shoddy job, but it held." "And did he say anything?" "Yes, sir. He paid me $5 silver. He said to keep my mouth shut about it. He said it was his private mark, and he did not want anyone else using it." The courtroom exploded. Hale was on his feet, his face purple. "He is lying. It is a conspiracy. This savage, and this old fool, and this drunkard." "Sit down, Mr. Hale," the judge roared, slamming his gavel. "One more outburst and I will have you in contempt." Hale sat, his chest heaving. The silver watch chain rose and fell. "The defense calls Miss Clara Bell." Clara walked to the stand. She was no longer the muddy, shamed girl. She was wearing her one good dress, her spine straight as a needle. She took the oath, her voice clear. Drexler, seeing his case collapsing, went on the attack. "Miss Bell, is it not true you were run out of town for your loose morals, that you were living in sin with a Mr. Ward?" Clara met his gaze. "No, sir. It is not. I was driven out of town by lies. The lies of Deacon Purcell. Who is your client's partner?" "Objection." "Sustained. Stick to the land, Miss Bell." "The land," Clara said, "is where his men attacked me. It is where he tried to steal my father's last memory." "You have no proof of any of this," Drexler shouted. "Just a block of dirt and the word of a bitter blacksmith." "I have this," Clara said. She held up the ranch ledger. "This is my journal, Your Honor. I kept a record." "A record of what your feelings," Drexler sneered. "A record of facts. I have an entry for the day of the flood. May I read it?" The judge nodded. "Proceed." Clara opened the book. Her voice was steady. She read her own clear, precise script. The flood hit. The bridge was destroyed. Talogiashki of the Dine rescued Miss Albright and 3 children. She read it all. The dive, the rope, the rescue. And then she read the last part. Her voice did not waver. On the far bank, Sheriff Pike and Mason Hale detained Silas, the blacksmith, preventing him from aiding the rescue. They ordered him to save Mr. Hale's timber assets instead. Several citizens, including Mr. Henderson and Miss Albright, witnessed this. She closed the book. She looked at the judge. "Mr. Drexler, Mr. Hale, they claim I am a liar. They claim I am a woman of no character." She looked at Mason Hale. "This man values his lumber, his private mark, over the lives of children. His character is the one on trial. He will lie about land. He will lie about a horse. He will lie about anything to get what he wants." The judge was silent for a full minute. He stared at Hale. He stared at Pike. "Mr. Hale," the judge said, his voice cold as ice. "Mr. Drexler, I have heard enough." He picked up Hale's pristine stamped deed. He held it up. "Paper can lie. This court finds sufficient evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and dereliction of duty." He slammed his gavel. 1. The deed of ownership presented by Mason Hale is hereby suspended, pending a full investigation by the United States Territorial Marshal. 2. This court orders a new, binding survey of the land in question. The original marker will be reset under the direct supervision of a federal marshal. not Sheriff Pike. 3. I am formally opening an investigation into the conduct of Sheriff Pike. I am asking the Marshal's office to look into his fines, his taxes, and his protection of assets. Court is adjourned. Deacon Purcell sat, his mouth open. Mason Hale's face was white with rage. He stood up, knocking his chair over. He walked past Clara in the aisle. He leaned in, his voice a venomous hiss. "You think you have won, you little harlot," he whispered, so only she could hear. "This is my territory. That judge goes back east. I stay. You will regret this, you and your old man and your savage pet. I will burn you all to the ground." He stormed out of the courtroom. Purcell was left behind, surrounded by people. Miss Albright was staring at him, her face full of contempt. Henderson was shaking his head. "Deacon," Henderson said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I think you have preached your last sermon in Dry Creek." The ride back from Prescott was slow, the wagon heavy with more than just supplies. It was heavy with the weight of a court's decision, a fragile, paper-thin victory. They returned to a town steeped in mud and silence. Sheriff Pike's office was empty. His tin star was gone. A quiet, tired-looking man in a dusty suit sat in his chair, a United States Marshal's badge pinned to his vest. He had arrived on the stage, read Judge Harlan's orders, and dismissed Pike with a single, curt nod. Pike had packed his saddlebags and ridden out before dawn, without a word to anyone. The new marshal, a man named Breen, did not speak to Hale's allies. He spoke to Elias. "The judge ordered a new survey," Breen said, his voice flat. "I am here to oversee it. Show me the marker." It was not a parade. It was a small, formal procession. Marshal Breen, Elias, Clara, and Ashki rode out to the canyon ridge, to the place where Clara had held the torch. They carried the original, rusted government marker. When they reached the patch of disturbed earth, Ashki dismounted. "Wait," he said to the marshal. He whistled, a low, two-note call. From a camp hidden in the rocks above, an old man appeared. He was dying, his face a map of 1,000 dry seasons. He was an elder, a Hatali that Ashki had gone to fetch. The marshal's hand twitched, but Elias put a hand on his arm. "Let this be. It is part of the mending." The elder, Hestian, walked to the hole. He took a small pouch from his belt. He began to chant, his voice low, a song of the earth. He sprinkled corn pollen, yellow as the dawn, onto the ground. Ashki translated, his voice just as low. "He speaks to the earth. He asks it to be at peace. He tells the water to run clean again. He says this line, 'It is not a wall to divide. It is a line to be respected, a neighbor's line.'" When the song was finished, Elias and Silas, who had insisted on coming, lifted the heavy rusted marker. They set it deep into the hole. They tamped the earth around it, sealing it in place. It was true again. Clara stepped forward. She was holding a single, long strand of bright blue wool, the color of the mountains at dusk. It was the same wool she had used to mend Ashki's pouch. She tied it firmly around the top of the marker, a small, bright flag of her own, a promise. Marshal Breen watched, his face impassive. He made a note in his ledger. "The marker is set," he said. He nodded to the elder. He nodded to Clara. "This land is yours. Miss Bell, the paper will be filed." The town was rebuilding, but it was a different town. The flood had washed away more than the bridge. It had washed away the old order. Silas the blacksmith was in charge of the bridge. He was not waiting for Hale's money or the railroad's plans. He was organizing the townspeople. "We build it ourselves," he had declared. "We build it to last." Elias drove his wagon, loaded with cured lumber from his own ranch, to the creek bed. He did not ask for payment. "For the crossing," he said to Silas. Silas looked at the lumber, then at Elias. He nodded once. "For the crossing, Mr. Ward." Elias then went to his well, the one in the center of town. He took down the old, faded free water sign. He nailed up a new one, with fresh black paint. It read, "The Dry Creek Community Well. Water is life. Share it as neighbors." He had, with that sign, formally given his spring to the town. The power of fear was broken. Mason Hale had not returned from Prescott. His assets were frozen. His name tied to the federal investigation. Deacon Purcell's church was open, but it was nearly empty. The townspeople, who had once hung on his every word, now walked past him in silence. He was just a man, his righteousness revealed as a hollow, hateful wind. One afternoon, as Clara was buying flour at the mercantile, Mrs. Gable approached her, the woman who had pulled her skirts away. Her face was pale. "Miss Bell," she said, twisting her hands. I must speak, my boy. He was one of the children in the schoolhouse. What Mr. Ashkey did." She took a shaky breath. "And what I did, what I said, I was afraid. I followed the deacon. It was wrong. I am deeply sorry for my words." Clara looked at the woman. She saw no victory. She just saw a person, small and tired. "Thank you for saying so, Mrs. Gable," Clara said. It was all that was needed. The ranch was healing. Elias sat on the porch, his arm in the sling, his shoulders stiff. He was old. He felt it in his bones. But as he watched Clara and Maria planting a small garden, he did not feel alone. He watched Ashkey in the corral, breaking one of the wild colts, his movements patient, like water on stone. This was his family. This was the family he had chosen. Ashkey finished his work and walked to the porch. Carrying a repaired bridle, he looked at Elias. The old man was dozing. His head nodded. "Hasty and Ward," Ashkey said, his voice quiet. He used the respectful term. "The fence in the north pasture is mended." Elias opened his eyes. He looked at the younger man. He saw the strength, the quiet integrity. "Thank you," Elias said. "Thank you, son." Ashkey's expression flickered, just for a moment. He had not had a father since the soldiers came. He just nodded. "The horses are secure." The bond was sealed. Clara took the money Elias paid her, her first real wages. She did not mend her old cabin. It was too full of ghosts. Instead, she bought the old, ruined livery stable that Pike had seized for taxes. It was just 4 walls and a leaky roof, but it was hers. She spent a week sweeping out the old straw and filth. Ashkey came, not speaking, and repaired the roof, his hammer ringing in the clear air. "It will be a workshop," she told him, as they shared bread and water. "My own?" "You have needles," he said. "You have skill." "I need more than that," she said. "I need a new trade." The next day, he brought 2 women to her workshop. They were dying, older, their hands as calloused as hers. They came on horseback, carrying heavy, tightly woven blankets. The patterns were lightning and mountains, in colors of earth and sky. "My grandmother's sisters," Ashkey said. "They have wool, they have blankets, they do not have salt, they do not have flour, they do not have steel needles." Clara looked at the women. They looked at her, their dark eyes sharp and appraising. Clara looked at the blankets. They were art. They were life. A new economy, not Hale's paper, not Pike's silver, a trade, honest work for honest goods. "Tell them," Clara said, her voice thick with a sudden, new hope, "that I am honored to trade. Tell them their blankets will have a place of honor in my shop." A new sign was painted. Clara Bell, seamstress, and trader in fine woolens. That evening, Clara sat at a new pine desk inside her workshop. The lantern cast a warm, yellow glow. She was writing, not in her ledger. She was writing a letter. Elias stopped by, carrying a parcel. Coffee, he said, to warm the new place. He saw the letter. Who are you writing to? Clara, you have no family left. I am writing to a woman in Silver City, Clara said, not looking up. Maria told me about her. Her husband ran off, and the town, they called her a harlot. They said she was a jinx. Clara dipped her pen again. I am telling her there is work here. I am telling her there is a place for a good seamstress. I am telling her that this is a town where women can own their own shop, where they can be safe. The moon was high. The ranch was quiet. The sound of crickets filled the night, a peaceful, rattling song. Clara and Ashki sat on the top step of the porch. They had been silent for a long time. The peace was not a gift. It was a thing they had built, together, out of mud and wool and truth. It was earned. You will leave soon, Clara said. It was not a question. I must, Ashki replied. He looked north, toward the high peaks, silver in the moonlight. The wool trail is clear. I must see my grandmother. I must tell them what has happened. Her heart tightened, a familiar, cold ache. Hale will come back. His threat was real. I know, he said. The paper is suspended. It is not gone. The snake is not dead. She turned her hand over on the wooden step. And us, what are we? We are not married. We are not anything. Not in their world. He looked at her hand. He did not touch it. I do not have the words of your deacon. I do not have a paper from your judge. He turned his own hand, palm up, on the step beside hers. I am a man who follows the seasons. I am a man who honors the earth. I cannot promise you forever. That is a paper word. It breaks. He moved his hand closer. I can promise this. I choose you. Today. When the sun comes up, I will choose you again. Season by season. That is my truth. She looked at his hand. It was strong. It was the hand that had pulled her from the mud, the hand that had held her in the dark, the hand that had blessed her land. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm. Season by season, she whispered, day by day. They sat together, holding hands, listening to the sound of the crickets, as the moon began its long, slow descent. The rain came. It was not the violence of the flood. It was a soft, warm, summer rain that fell for 3 steady days. It washed the caked mud from the streets, soaked the parched alkali flats, and turned the new, raw channel of the dry creek into a clear, murmuring stream. When the sun returned, the land was changed. For the first time in memory, a pale, hesitant fuzz of green pushed its way up through the red dust. The world was healing. Dry Creek held a celebration. Silas, the blacksmith, who had become the town's unofficial leader, called it the New Bridge and Marker Market. The new bridge was a marvel. It was built of Elias's donated lumber and Silas's heavy iron bolts, wide enough for 2 wagons to pass. Children, who had been forbidden from the creek bed for weeks, ran laughing from one side to the other, tossing stones into the clear water. Clara's new workshop was the center of the market. She had a stall set up outside her open livery doors. She was not alone. The 2 Dine women, Ashki's relatives, sat with her, their looms propped against the wall. They worked, their hands flying, as the townspeople watched in quiet awe. On her tables, Clara had not just mended shirts. She had new coats, cut from sturdy canvas, but lined with the soft, intricately patterned dine wool. They were jackets built for the high desert, a marriage of 2 worlds. Mrs. Gable, the woman who had apologized, was her first customer. She bought a coat, her hand brushing the lightning pattern. It is beautiful. Clara, she said, meeting her eyes. Truly. Henderson, the mercantile owner, bought one. Silas traded a set of new tools for another. The economy of Dry Creek was no longer based on paper and fear. It was built on wool, steel, flour, and respect. Elias Ward, his arm now free from the sling but his shoulder still stiff, walked to the community well. He took down the sign he had made. He nailed up a new one. The paint was bright. It read, "Water for all, equal." He stepped back and watched the children playing on the bridge. He saw Miss Albright ringing her school bell. She was calling her class, which now included 2 small, shy Dine children, to order. He smiled, a deep, tired smile. He was an old man, but he was not a ghost. The stagecoach rattled in, carrying the mail. Marshal Breen, his federal work finished, was waiting to board. He handed a single letter to Elias before he left. Elias opened it. He read it slowly, his face calm. He folded it and walked over to Clara's stall. "It is from the district judge," he said, his voice quiet. Clara stopped her work. "Hail." "Pike," Elias said. "He is in a federal jail in Yuma. The judge found him guilty of extortion, conspiracy, and dereliction of duty." A long, shuddering breath left Clara. The man with the badge was gone. "And Mason Hale?" Elias sighed, looking at the distant red cliffs. "Hale. His assets in this county are seized. His paper is worthless. But the man himself is gone. The letter says he was last seen in Santa Fe. He is already talking to new railroad men, pushing for a different route." "He is a snake," Clara said softly. "He is," Elias agreed. "We cut off his tail, but the head is still looking for prey." "He is not our prey anymore," Clara said, feeling a cold weight lift from her. "He has no power here. Dry Creek is not his town." The market day ended. The sun began to set, turning the sky to a deep, bruised purple. The air was cool. Clara stood in the doorway of her shop, sweeping the floor. A sound made her look up. He was riding in from the north, as if he were a part of the twilight. Tlogi Ashki. He had been gone for 2 weeks, on the wool trail, his string of black colts following him. He looked strong and rested. He rode up to her workshop and dismounted. He stood before her, just looking. He saw her, not as a victim, but as a proprietor, her hands dusted with flour, her hair tied back with a leather thong. "You are a traitor," he said. A small, rare smile touched the corners of his mouth. "I am," she said, her heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. "And you are a traveler." "I saw my grandmother," he said. "I told her about the flood, about the rope, about the woman who keeps the ledger." Clara waited, holding her breath. She said, Ashki continued, that a woman who can tie a knot that strong is a woman to be known. She said, "It is time for you to bring her home." Clara's hands tightened on the broom. "Home to the ranch." "Home," he said. He gestured, not to the ranch, but to the north, to the high peaks that were now just a black line against the stars. "To the Hogan, to my family. She wants to see the woman who spins thread from adversity." This was the true invitation. It was not a proposal of marriage, not in the Bilagana world. It was an acceptance into his. "I do not know your ways, Ashki," she whispered, her fear a small, cold echo. "They will not understand me." "You know my way," he said. "You know key connection." He held out his hand, not to lift her, not to save her, just to offer, "Come, ride with me, see where I am from." She looked at his hand, the hand that had held her in the dark, the hand that had placed the blessing pouch in hers. She put the broom down. She put her hand in his. He lifted her onto his horse, seating her in front of him. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. It was the same way he had held her that day in the street. But this was not a rescue. This was a beginning. They rode out of the small, sleeping town, past the warm spring ranch, and toward the dark, open land. Clara looked back. Once. She thought of the whispers. She thought of the laughter. She thought of the false paper that had nearly destroyed her. Home. She finally understood. It was not a piece of paper. It was not a roof. It was not a line drawn in the dust. Home was the person who chose you in the middle of the storm, the one who saw all your broken pieces and still chose you. Later, sitting by his family's fire, safe inside the round, warm walls of the Hogan, they spoke of the future. They spoke of the wool trail, which was now a shared road of trade, not a secret path. They spoke of Miss Albright's school, and how Elias had offered to pay for a second teacher, one who spoke Dine, so the children could learn both languages, both histories. They spoke of children who would be taught how to stitch a fine seam and how to spin strong wool, children who would be taught how to read a book and how to tie a knot that could be trusted with a life. Miles away, on the edge of the canyon, the moon rose. It shined on the rusted government marker, standing straight and true. Tied to it, the small strip of blue wool fluttered in the night wind. It was the thread that bound a promise. It was the stitch that held. She was once the joke of Dry Creek. Now, she was the one who held the thread. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Wild West Tales and like this video. It would also help us immensely if you hit that hype button, so this story can be heard by more folks.